welcome back to Crime on the Clark Fork, the true crime podcast where I tell you about big crimes that happen in small places, with each case having occurred in areas with populations of 15,000 or less. My name is Mackenzie Spence, and I am your host. I apologize for my lack of episode in June, so happy July. If you were one of the lucky few to hear my May podcast, there was only about 7 of you before I took it down. Congratulations. And that would be why you probably noticed if you are listening on Spotify or anything like that. We go from episode 26 to episode 28. Maybe one day I will repost episode 27. It was just real close to home, and it did make me a little bit nervous just because there is not a conclusion to that case yet. And some of the people that are involved in that case are still out and about. So I just got a little bit anxious about it and I took it down, but if you were one of the 7, congratulations. You got to hear that case in that episode. With that being said, I'm just going to jump right in. So the sources for this episode are Wikipedia, the Doe Network, National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, The Sun, WyomingNews.com, A&E, Herald Sun, Find a Grave, CBS News, Oxygen, Cowboy State Daily, People, CNN, NBC News, RonFranskell.com, Murderpedia, and KSL.com. Riverton, Wyoming, 1980, population 7,995. Virginia Uden and her 2 sons, Richard and Reagan, went missing on September 12, 1980, after leaving Virginia's mom's house in Riverton, Wyoming, around 1:30 p.m. When the 3 left the home, they were on their way to meet up with Gerald Uden, but according to Gerald, they had never arrived. At the time of their disappearances, Virginia was 32 years old, Reagan was 10, and Richard was 11. Virginia's mother, Claire, was the one to report her daughter and grandchildren as missing to the police. She knew that her daughter would have never disappeared without saying anything to her. The station wagon that Virginia was driving was found just under a month later on October 4th, 1980. It was located in the Wind River Canyon area of Fremont County in Wyoming, and the vehicle was vandalized, and there were bullet casings and traces of type A blood found inside the car, which is the same blood type as Virginia. After the vehicle was found, the police department sent 75 volunteers and deputies to look for evidence where the car was discovered. When they got to the location, it was quickly determined that finding anything useful would be harder than they thought. The area where the car is popular with hunters and other outdoor recreationists, which made it hard to determine what was evidence and what was junk from others who had been in the area. On top of this, when Virginia's mother, Claire, arrived to help with the search, she noticed that many of the volunteers were standing around, chatting, and not actually searching for anything. She had even offered to pay for food and equipment for volunteers, but the sheriff told her that that wasn't necessary. In the area, there were some things that were found, including a knife, a kid's left shoe, boys' underwear, an old car mat, a piece of brown carpet, a pocket comb, and a brown furry coat, which were all photographed, cataloged, and stored as evidence. The brown furry coat is the thing that Claire saw that she knew was most likely Virginia's, because Claire had bought Virginia that exact coat. Now, Virginia and the boys were going to meet Gerald Uden, who was Virginia's ex-husband. Now, Gerald had met a new woman named Alice in 1976, after Alice had moved to Fremont County, Wyoming, after leaving her husband. She had moved in next door to Gerald, and when she knocked on his door, Gerald was immediately head over heels, recalling that she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Alice was a mother to 5 children and had 3 previous marriages, 2 of which ended in divorce, and 1 that left her widowed. Gerald had also been married 3 times and subsequently divorced, including to Virginia. But by that summer, the two began to date, and after 5 months of knowing each other, they got married and moved to a farm. Alice's daughter Erica recalls that she had a great childhood and never wanted for anything. Now, Gerald was the adoptive father to two children from his previous marriage to Virginia, which are Virginia's kids, Richard and Reagan. He had adopted the two boys before him and their mother, Virginia, got a divorce, which also meant that he paid child support for the two kids. In the summer of 1980, Virginia and the boys moved into the same area that Alice and Gerald were living in Wyoming, and Gerald was known as being a really great dad to the boys. But it wasn't a secret that Virginia and her two boys were a pain point in Alice's and Gerald's marriage, especially because Virginia had been requesting more child support from Gerald. Alice hated Virginia, but not because she was jealous with Gerald, but because of the money. About 2 months into the investigation, Alice and Gerald were brought in for questioning in the disappearances. And according to investigators, Alice was very emotional during the questioning and didn't answer many of their questions at all. Instead, she would change the subject or ramble about her ex-husbands and her children. After 4 hours, the questioning was over, and the detective wrote, and I quote, "It was apparent to me, but only my personal feelings, that she was very guilty in covering up the issue. Almost broke at one time." End quote. 4 days after Alice was brought in for questioning, Gerald was brought in. He was also quite upset and was physically shaking during his questioning. At one point, the investigators showed Gerald a photo of Virginia's vandalized vehicle, and Gerald looked at the photos and made a remark about the car not being burned up like they had told him before. The investigator told him that it looked like it had been burned, but it actually hadn't been set on fire. Gerald said that the setting it on fire would have been a dumb thing to do, and when the investigator asked him why he thought it would have been dumb, he said that based on the photos, if someone were to set it on fire, it would have been able to be seen from town. Confused, the investigators took another look at the crime scene photos, thinking that maybe he had missed something, but when he looked at the pictures again, he hadn't. He looked up at Gerald and told him that you couldn't see any town in any of the pictures that he was shown. Gerald took another look at the pictures, and just as the investigator stated, you couldn't see town in any of the photos. So Gerald attempted to back up his statement and said that he heard on the news that the smoke would have been seen from town and that he knew where those photos were taken and that he had went up there a lot. From what the detectives knew, no one had told Gerald where the car was found, and it also wasn't something that was widely broadcast on the news. After being called out on the photos, Gerald began to ramble, talking about suicide and how maybe that would solve the problems he was having now. He also talked about how he didn't like jails and the thought of being confined in a small room for the rest of his life wasn't an option. He also talked about how he had tried to love Virginia and her boys, but Virginia wasn't good to him, and about how much Virginia and Alice had hated each other. The investigator let him ramble on until he ran out of things to say, and after 90 minutes, Gerald left the questioning, and the investigator wrote, and I quote, "It is only my personal feeling, but I could see guilt all over him. I am convinced he is guilty and is covering it up." End quote. Alice and Gerald returned to their farm and lived their lives for the next 2 years before deciding to sell the property and move to Chadwick, Missouri. 12 years after moving to Missouri, one of Alice's children, her oldest son, Todd Scott, went to police and told him that his mother confessed that she had killed her third husband, Ron Holtz, before moving the family to Fremont County in Wyoming back in 1976. He said that she had confided in him when he was about 14 or 15 years old, which was years before he got the bravery to go to the police. She had told the teen that Ron had been abusive and that she was afraid of him. So one night, she got her gun while he was sleeping and shot him in the back of the head. She then told her son that she wrapped his body in blankets, took his body out of the trailer that they were living in, put him in a barrel, and threw the barrel down an abandoned gold mine on a ranch that she had worked on in the past. Todd recalled that the relationship between his mother and Ron was abusive and turbulent. When the police heard this confession, they began their search for the gold mine, the barrel, and the body of Ron, but they were not able to find anything, which made the case go cold, and Alice was able to continue to live her life with Gerald in Missouri. In Missouri, the couple was seen as a typical family, raising their children on the farm and regularly attending church. They were also known to attend their children's athletic events at the school until they all graduated. Their neighbor also knew them as good people and the kind that you would lean over the fence and talk to about your chickens with. Alice's children and grandchildren knew her as someone who liked to garden and cook, and she liked to do these things with her grandkids as they grew up. In 2005, which was 11 years after Todd had gone to police to tell them what his mother had confessed, an agent named Andrew Hansen began to look into cold case files. On January 18th, 2005, police showed up to Alice and Gerald's home in Missouri and finally asked Alice about the story that her son Todd had reported 11 years earlier. When the detectives mentioned the name Ronald Holtz, Alice literally fell out of her chair. She then denied everything that Todd had said, saying that the tale was just cautionary for her child and that she had actually just kicked Ron to the curb and left him. A few months after this questioning, a tip came in about where that abandoned gold mine could be found. An excavation was complete, and at the bottom, police found pieces of a barrel, a human skeleton, and the kicker, a human skull with a bullet hole in it. When they did DNA testing on the skeletonized remains, they came back positive for Ron Holtz. Now, these findings were the nail in Alice's coffin, so to speak. The evidence was enough for police to arrest Alice Uden in her third husband, Ron's murder. At this time, she was 74 years old. Police brought her in and began questioning her and confronted her with their findings from the gold mine shaft. When she saw the evidence that they had against her, she confessed to killing Ron. She said that he had been threatening to kill Erica, her daughter, so she shot him and dumped his body. Ron and Alice had met while Alice was a nurse, and Ron, who was a Vietnam veteran, was a patient in a psychiatric unit at the VA hospital in Sheridan, Wyoming. Ron was known at the hospital as a patient that was hostile, irritable, and explosive, with no intention to change the way he acted. Even so, the two were married in September of 1974, and Ron was released from the VA hospital on December 24th, 1974. When Ron was released, his and Alice's relationship was not off to a good start. At one point, the two had gotten into a car accident in Illinois, and Ron made Alice get out of the car so he could beat and kick her while she was on the side of the road. By February 5th, 1975, Alice filed for divorce from Ron, which was granted because he never was able to be found to be served the divorce papers. Now, at the time of Alice's arrest in 2005, Gerald was on the road working as a trucker. When he finally arrived home, police met him at his home and informed him that Alice had been arrested. Now, Gerald assumed that she had been arrested and questioned about Virginia and the boys' disappearances, and seemed to know nothing of her previous husband's death. Because of this, he said, and I quote, "Now you guys are here, I've got to assume you must have either found some bodies. I gotta tell you, if you found bodies, it's a miracle," end quote. Now, hearing this, police brought Gerald in for questioning. In that interview, he told them that on September 12th, 1980, he lured Virginia to meet with him near Pavilion, Wyoming, so he could take her and the boys dove hunting. He said Virginia had brought a .22 rifle and brought it from her car and handed it to Gerald, who tested it once. He then said, and I quote, "Virginia was there, the gun was there, I was there, and I shot her square in the back of the head and she went down. It was fast. It was 10 seconds and they were gone. I didn't get any pleasure out of doing it, none. But it did stop the child support, and that was going to come to about $16,000. End quote. After he shot Virginia, he shot Richard behind the ear while the young boy was standing by the car. Reagan then ran away after watching his adoptive father shoot his mother and brother, but he tripped and fell into a ditch. Gerald quietly approached the boy, and as the little boy laid there in the ditch, Gerald shot him behind the ear, killing him. Gerald informed police that after he shot all three of them, he then put their bodies in the Lewiston gold mine. He got rid of the gun that he used and then tried to drive the station wagon off of a cliff, but was unsuccessful. He then returned to the mine on November 5th, 1980, removed the three bodies, and then put them in 55 and 35-gallon drums. He drove to Fremont Lake, went out on a boat, and dumped the drums in the lake before driving off. Initially, Gerald had told police that he dumped their bodies in the Pacific Ocean, but eventually came clean that he had actually dumped their bodies in the deepest part of Fremont Lake. Gerald had claimed that his new wife, Alice, had convinced him that Virginia was becoming a problem because of her insistence on increasing child support payments. It got to the point that he thought the only way that he could keep Alice happy was to kill his ex-wife and adoptive sons. He also said that Virginia was intolerable and was always asking for more money, but she would also make it hard for him to see the two boys, and she would try to break up Alice and Gerald's marriage. Both Alice and Gerald were extradited back to Wyoming to stand trial for their crimes. After the confession from Gerald and he was extradited back to Wyoming, the police had him bring them to where he dumped the three bodies. They searched this area of the lake for days, but were never able to find the bodies of Virginia, Reagan, or Richard. In 2013, Gerald pled guilty to the deaths of his ex-wife Virginia and his two adoptive sons, Richard and Reagan, which led to 3 life sentences. In court, Gerald claimed that Virginia had only come to him so she could get a husband, but through the process, he fell in love with her and they got married. He then adopted her 2 children, and she filed for divorce 6 weeks later, saddling him with child support payments. As Alice was in the process of being charged for Ron's murder, police were tipped off to a mysterious death of her second husband, Dodd Prunty, who died at age 45. At the time of his death, there wasn't any suspicion around how he had died. He was an alcoholic, and his death certificate says that he passed from alcoholism. So because of this, there was no autopsy done. But when police pulled his medical records, they noticed that his symptoms just before his death were consistent with someone who had been poisoned with antifreeze. Unfortunately, since there was no autopsy performed, there is really no way of proving that Alice murdered her second husband as well. During Alice's trial, she wore a court-supplied hearing aid, a blue suit, and wire-rimmed glasses. She used a wheelchair and cried as she talked about the death of her ex-husband, Ron. She told the court that she had tried to atone for the murder and that she wished she would have never met him, so none of this would have happened. Her son, Todd, took the stand to testify against his mother and told her that he hated her and couldn't fathom why a mother would tell her children that she had killed someone. The confession left him telling anyone who would listen about what she had done to try and get the weight of the truth off of him. During the trial, Alice's other children took the stand, and told the jury that their mother had also told them that she had killed Ron while he was sleeping. All of the children testified that when their mother told them of the murder, she was matter of fact and didn't seem to show any remorse for what she had done. One of her children, Scott, testified that when his mother had told him that she disposed of Ron's body in an abandoned mine shaft, he knew it had to be the one on the Remount Ranch, which is where his mother and her second husband, Don Prunty, had worked as caretakers in the 1970s. This ranch is also depicted in the children's novel My Friend Flicka, which mentions the mine as a place where carcasses from dead animals on the ranch were dumped. He also testified that Alice had mentioned that she had someone help her get Ron's body into the mine shaft, but no other perpetrator has been named in this case. After hearing testimony and arguments from both sides, the jury didn't buy that she was just a frail woman. On May 8, 2014, Alice was convicted of second-degree murder for the death of Ron, which carried a sentence of life in prison. Alice died in prison 5 years later due to chronic health issues in 2019. Before Alice had passed away in prison, she and Gerald were not allowed to communicate. One day after she died, Gerald decided to place the blame of the triple homicide on Alice. He wrote to a true crime writer in a letter, and I quote, "The murderess, Alice Uden, has passed on to the next life. I asked her to take ownership of Don Prunty and Virginia and the boys, but she refused. I am now free to seek total exoneration, which I intend to do," end quote. Gerald claims that he falsely confessed to the murders of Virginia, Richard, and Reagan, but the courts dismissed this claim in 2020. He then tried to get his charges dismissed again in 2023 by petitioning the court to allow him to withdraw his 3 first-degree murder charges because he claimed he falsely confessed to the murders so Alice wouldn't be accused. He then claimed that his confession was under coercion due to the circumstances of Alice being arrested. The High Court dismissed his claims yet again, and as of today, the bodies of Virginia, Richard, and Reagan have not been found. Unfortunately, Virginia's mother, Claire, passed away at the age of 92, just months before Gerald and Alice were arrested for the murders, so she was never able to see her daughter get justice. Now I'm going to leave you with something that a forensic psychologist wrote about this couple, and I quote, "The Udens exemplify the human ability of not living up to their potential. In fact, by choice and decision, to be evil and exploitative. They said betwixt the two, Alice was by far is more sinister and coldly ruthless to the core. For she, like a scorpion, would willingly kill all, including self, who would challenge her control and power. As for Gerald, the spineless and feckless sponge creation was/is without decency, who aided in killing his own children because Alice told him to do so. Ah, you may ask, why did he confess? And the answer is to protect his mentor." End quote. And that is the end of this case. As always, please give me 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as a review on Apple Podcasts. I'm always looking for cases to cover, so if you have a case suggestion, please visit the link in the show's Instagram page at Crime on the Clark Fork, where I also post pictures from the cases that I cover. So if you go give that a quick follow, you'll see pictures from every single episode that I've done. Now, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll catch you next time with more big crime in small places.